Hello, welcome. Happy Thursday. See some familiar faces. I tried a couple times in webinars to have music playing, and it's just an absolute disaster where the audio's coming through and then I'm talking, and then some people are like hearing music and then people can't hear what everybody's saying. So just cut that out for now. Very excited about this. Quick agenda on what we're covering today. So we are getting into what I'm calling the 4 pillars of high performance workspaces. This has been very cathartic to think through what makes a high performance workspace. Might not be what you're expecting. This framework has been the result of a lot of trial and error and really thinking through what is the right process, both for teams that have an existing workspace, but it's just chaotic and unraveling, versus teams that are migrating to Notion and starting from scratch. So these have been a lot of the common threads that have come up and have helped not only produce workspaces or workspace changes, but help teams with varying familiarity with Notion get a handle on what the day-to-day workflow looks like in Notion. It's always a big thing to navigate where you've got Notion experts on a team and you've got people that just joined and have never used it. And then quick notes on an upcoming course that might be of interest to some of you in here that we'll talk about. We've got some new details there, and then just some space for Q&A and kind of discussion around workspace building. And again, this is really for those of us who are part of a company and are like the internal Notion expert and are tasked with being the point person for everything Notion related, or we've dabbled in creating templates and part of the Notion creator economy and community and are thinking about helping teams or organizations with building or rebuilding their workspace. At least from my end, there's been a huge amount of demand, especially for smaller teams that just need an external person to tell them what to do essentially with their Notion workspace. We'll really target it for those use cases. If we are just meeting for the first time, I'm Dave. I've been a Notion consultant for a little over 2 years now, studied and worked as an architect, founded a creative agency with my brother in New York, which we ran for 4 years, working with a lot of New York-based early stage startups, and also taught for, I think in total, 7 years on everything from design to computer science and a lot of stuff in between. One common thread that you may have seen already with the Notion community is that everything from pretty wide variety of backgrounds. Those of you who I recognize that were in the Notion Consultant Bootcamp, the same story where everybody's coming in from, some people are coming in from tech, from change management, from creative fields. Common thread is we love Notion and love building workspaces and helping others be more productive or get more joy in their day-to-day work. I'm going to get into the 4 pillars of building high-performance workspaces. Now, one thing to note, which is may not be what we're expecting. When I started Notion Consulting, the image in my head of what is a super powerful, fast, cutting-edge, state-of-the-art workspace, and in my head it was a lot of formulas and a lot of roll-ups and relations that were doing a lot of cool stuff. And probably the first year of consulting, I found very quickly that teams were coming to consultants, and me included, saying, I'm just super overwhelmed. I have no idea what this is. I'm afraid I'm going to delete this property and break the entire workspace. And so it really changed my view on what makes a high performance workspace. And it was in a lot of ways the inverse of what my assumption was. So first pillar, which is ease. This is especially important when we are rebuilding a workspace or rethinking a workspace and really thinking through the lens of an employee or a team member who is brand new to Notion, who has never used it. Can they navigate effectively? Can they find the information that they're looking for? And can they do it with minimal guidance and minimal support? That's the key goal and really has a big impact on the long-term sustainability of a workspace. And it could be the difference between we set up this workspace and it's working great, and then 3 months later it unravels again, versus it's sustainable, it's manageable, teams are comfortable and confident making changes to their workspace. What do we mean by that? First thing, databases, 9 times out of 10, have clear benefits over just organizing collections of pages, and we'll get into a couple of reasons why. The second one is, even if we're a smaller team, leveraging team spaces, which are groups of pages and dashboards in your sidebar can make it a lot easier to navigate a workspace and to really just act as umbrellas or categories for different areas of a workspace. Leveraging descriptions, this is like callouts or toggles, any page where team members could use a little bit of context and a little bit of guidance goes a long way to just avoid, hey, what am I looking at type of scenario. And figuring out what is the level of consistency that we want across teams and across departments. For the most common example is engineering teams tend to have very clear ideas of what they want in their team dashboard versus a sales team might be throwing a bunch of links in there because they're using 3 or 4 different other tools and are not tracking every task or every action or even their CRM in Notion. So we're always going to have that variability when it comes to even a small team. So deciding what we want to have consistent across every team member. The best starting point that I found when it comes to helping teams and especially new employees or new team members navigate Notion is the sidebar. So when we think of the sidebar, what we're doing is, just to zoom out a little bit, the first level, and this is, I think, only for pro plans or plus plans, where we have team spaces where we could decide which groups do we want to give access to, whether it's member or as an admin. And that really is the first category to then start to group and organize sets of pages. So in this case, in my case, there's several different things. I'm doing courses, I'm doing consulting. I have my own personal stuff in there, my journal stuff. So literally everything in the entire life in Notion pretty much. So team space is the first starting point, but then from there, if we zoom into this dashboard, for example, when we expand a dashboard page, we're going to see every page that's linked on that dashboard. So we could use these toggles in the sidebar to do a lot of the navigation. And this is something that maybe you've had a different experience, but a lot of teams just gloss over and just forget that the sidebar could be a great way to navigate quickly. And another thing to note that has worked really well is, especially for teams that are starting out and we're working with a lot of databases, focusing only in the databases first and setting up the views that we want before we set up customized dashboards. So what do we mean by that? Essentially, let me make sure this, okay. So if we move from another tool and we say we are now managing tasks and that's related to projects and related to documents, it could get really confusing as to whether, hey, am I looking at a dashboard of documents or am I looking at the original database? And by starting out with databases first and setting up the specific views that we need, maybe what's in our backlog or what needs to be published, then we can start to set up those views. And then when we create new dashboards, we already have those views in place and it's really just about customizing how those are working. So this also acts as a training tool where by navigating only using the sidebar, we minimize that potential overwhelm of seeing a page and seeing maybe different columns or different sections of a page that, again, unless you're creating the page, a lot of times it could just get really overwhelming. Just some ideas in terms of when we're thinking about ease of use and focusing in on the sidebar first, it's a quick check of how easy it is to navigate our workspace quickly. Okay, so next is speed. When we think of investing in building or optimizing a workspace, the number one ROI that we're looking for is, does this speed up our work? Does it maximize the time that we have for the deep work, the more creative work, and really decreasing the amount of time that we're spending updating information manually or copying and pasting information or even just searching for the right pages? Really, when we're thinking about the performance of a workspace, it has to increase the speed or increase the focus of a team. Otherwise, it's essentially not really effective, right? We're taking a step backward. When we think about speed, the best way to speed up workflows is through templatizing. The past year has been full of huge, big and small updates in Notion, but a lot of which have been focused on helping templatize repeatable tasks. And there's different ways to do that, which I want to touch on. And there's also talks that I've made on automation in particular. When we think about templatizing repeatable tasks, there's 3 key ways to do this. So The most straightforward one is if we are in a page and we want to quickly add a new block to the page. And for context, a block is any component of a page. So it could be anything from a link to a bookmark to a linked view of a database. These are all considered blocks. So creating buttons within a page are a very quick way to pre-populate content that you can fill in. The second level is templates within databases. If we're looking at a content calendar database, we could have templates for posts on X versus a short video versus a text post, and guide ourselves and our teams on what are the steps to execute on. And then there's automations, which is the newest feature, which allows us to really go a little bit or a lot further when it comes to, I want to create a new page and populate it with as much information as possible. So let's take a look at how. So if we, for example, at the beginning, so if we're looking at a database and we create a template within the database, this was a kind of a whole Star Wars themed training that I did. So if you're wondering what exactly am I looking at? So this is the idea of setting up a new training for somebody who's joining, in this case, the Jedi in training. So here we're setting up a button. We're deciding, hey, I want to add this page to the specific database. I want to pre-name all of these pages to that database. So this is leveraging buttons within a template. The big kind of TLDR on this is through a combination of using a button, deciding, do I want to add pages to a database? Do I want to update properties within each of those pages? Deciding what can I set up in advance that's going to be maybe 90% of the way there, to avoid having to set up a new page and do all of this stuff manually. And then this is an example of, we create the button and it's pre-populating this page with a set of actions that, in this case, a Jedi in training has to take. And then we go to one other scenario. In the case that we are thinking one level deeper, this is looking at, we've got a database of trainees and we're filtering to only show specific trainees within that database. So the best parallel is like a CRM. We can now set up automation so that anytime I add a new trainee to this database, I could pre-populate certain properties automatically. If we're adding a grandmaster, I'm adding that page, and then I'm also deciding, hey, I wanted to also pre-populate with a set of actions. We could use the automations feature within the database to set all of this in advance, right? There's a lot here, and I would also preface this with the big step prior to this kind of building mode is really just bullet points and outlines of what do we want our workspace to do, what are we trying to organize, and if there's repeatable actions, listing those out in as much detail as possible. And then that way using that to say, okay, here's how we're going to templatize. So this is a part that also a lot of teams just get overwhelmed with, but when in doubt, just start with a simple outline, whether it's of an entire workspace or of a specific workflow that's happening. And then Trey, I'll send over the full Jedi training so that you could do that self-paced and reach out if we get stuck. Okay, third pillar, this is collaboration. So this is something that personally, when I started consulting, I wasn't too keen on using Notion for communications and for tagging clients or analysts that are working with me. But the more I've used it and the more I've seen larger teams leverage communication in Notion, has definitely highlighted the key benefits of tagging team members and assigning specific pages or tasks to team members, and really just decreasing the amount of communication that's happening outside of Notion, specifically, most importantly, email, decreasing the amount of emails going back and forth. And then to a lesser degree in Slack. Most of the teams, larger companies that I'm working with are still using Slack or Teams, but what I found is that they are using it a lot less for quick back and forths, so that they end up becoming more urgent messages, which is a huge plus. It just decreases the amount of messaging and communication overload that's happening when we've got team members that are part of different departments or working on multiple projects concurrently. So when we think about collaboration in Notion, a lot of it's happening through text, through comments, through tagging team members, through collaborating and simultaneously adding content to the same page. And especially for remote teams, this is A really critical part of trying to get as close as possible to that. We're in the same room and we're brainstorming and ideating and getting as close to that as possible. So when we think about communication specifically, there's a few ways to do it, and I'm sure most of us are already familiar. But the couple things to note are when we are commenting on pages, so this is that top bar right below the title of the page, we can think about this as like high-level questions or notes about the entire contents of that page, right? This could be a running thread of a task where maybe multiple people are working at the same time. Big benefit here is that it's very visible. It's front and center at the top of the page, hard to miss. And as we tag team members using the @ symbol, they're getting a notification on their sidebar, which allows them to jump straight into the page that you're referencing. So again, a little bit quicker than if we drop a message in Slack and then have to copy and paste the link to the Notion page. When we do it in Notion, they could jump straight to the page, archive that message, and then respond to any actionable items or comments. And then when we think about our sidebar and specifically our notification bar, this is updated also and has gone through some changes over the past couple months. But essentially, like we mentioned, we could quickly resolve a comment. So this is looking at a comment where we're tagged in and where we have a little bit of back and forth. And this is also something that takes some getting used to, because we want to make sure that there's consistency in terms of where people are posting comments, how they're posting comments, and making sure that we're not over tagging team members. So things like that have a little bit of a learning curve. And then personally, the notifications or the updates portion of the sidebar can also be really useful if we set reminders for ourselves. So for example, with proposals, I might send a proposal and then just make a note on that page that says at 1 week from now, just follow up with prospective client. And you can set a reminder anytime you are tagging a date so that it shows up, you get that little red bubble, and then it's pointing you directly to the page that you need to follow up on. So that's been really useful, mainly because, again, from a speed standpoint, it's faster than creating a task and then writing out follow up with client, linking to that proposal page, and maybe like tagging it business development as a project or as a work stream. Not only can we tag team members, but we can also tag dates and then set reminders to those dates, which all kind of lives in that updates sidebar. So again, it goes back to the speed thing. And Rachel, on the buttons thing, I know that was a lot in there, but starting with the outline, and then we'll get to the checklist in terms of what are the steps before that. The last pillar that I found to be pretty critical to teams finding what they need quickly is discoverability. So there's a few key factors that impact how discoverable content is within a workspace. And the most common scenario with larger teams, is 50 plus person teams, is you have departments that are super organized, super structured, and then other departments that have thrown Notion pages just in a list view, no databases, which ultimately makes it harder to discover the right information, especially if you're not part of that team. This is also something that Notion's been working on quite a bit when it comes to search and getting more granular with search. And then also, for those of us who've played around with Notion AI and the new Q&A feature, bypassing the search window altogether in favor of just saying, hey, do we have any resources on this particular topic in our workspace? And then having Notion Q&A point us to that particular page or set of pages. This also goes back to organizing pages in databases as much as possible. So that added context from organizing pages in databases, again, prevents the confusion and the going back and forth and the questions of, hey, am I in the right spot? Is there another version of this? So we're just minimizing that confusion by doing that, and then also makes these pages more discoverable when we're searching or when we're using Notion Q&A. So if we type in a page word like workflow, we can see all the things that come up. And then we also have like page previews, which is also a relatively new feature. And then we can also see who created the document, who last edited it, added context to really just ensure that we're in the right place. One other relatively new update, I guess not so new now, I'm losing track of all the Notion updates recently, but getting more granular with search, identifying, hey, the search term, looking for it only in the title, or I want to see only pages that were created by this team member or only within this team space. This has been really helpful, especially as teams get bigger, just to not have to navigate to the right dashboard and to the right page to find what we're looking for. And then if we haven't used Notion Q&A, it's pretty incredible, and I think is one of the first real use cases of AI that I think this goes to more incentive of having a clear structure of how we're organizing pages and information to make it easier for tools, whether it's Notion AI and Q&A or other tools, to find the right information. Biggest example is if we're creating content and we organize all of that content into one database, we could quickly query, hey, have I written about productivity for teams before, or have I written about monthly planning? And we could surface all of that old stuff in a lot less steps than if we're manually searching a database or a set of pages. And then I also want to revisit again the sidebar, because this also plays a key role in discoverability. As team members are just exploring and navigating a workspace, this is usually where, especially a lot of new team members or new employees start, where they want to just toggle into what's in that page before having to open it. So if it's just generally really useful for getting a sense of where information lives. And this gets pretty limited if we are not thinking through how we're organizing or grouping sets of pages. Pro sidebar as much as possible, a lot of benefits there. Okay, I want to switch gears to the Workspace Builders checklist, and this is something that I've just been evolving over time, and lately thinking through a lot of and resources and playbooks, especially for clients that are just trying to wrap their head around what are we doing exactly when you talk about building a workspace or optimizing a workspace. So there's a lot of just training and awareness building involved in whether we're working with the team or we're working with clients. Want to switch gears to the checklist a little bit to see how it works and how we might use it. What I want to do is going to make a duplicate of it so I don't destroy it. I should have done it already. The checklist really comes down to three key categories, right? So we start in build mode. This is thinking, starting from scratch. What are we trying to build and organize and manage in Notion? The second phase is optimizing, accounting for feedback, for input from as many people as possible, as early in the process as possible. Not only to get feedback and help improve the workspace, but we're also using this to get buy-in from team members who are new to Notion or skeptical of Notion or just have a lot of questions, making sure that everybody has space to share not only feedback, but like concerns or general questions. And then training and improving. So making sure that every team member has the resources that they need, has the guidance so that they're navigating the workspace comfortably, confidently, and can continue to build on what's already there. So if we start with build, and I think we're going to focus on these first three today just to get a sense of what this might look like. So with building or updating a workspace, this really starts with as bare bones an outline as possible, not looking at any databases or Notion templates or images, mainly because everybody just gets super distracted, right? So it's with a simple bullet point outline, it's impossible to get distracted, and we're just laying out what are the things that we want to track and what are the essential pieces of information that we want to organize so that we don't get stuck using or getting slowed down by a template that has a bunch of other stuff that us or our team are not really going to use, which happens quite a bit. So when we think about defining objectives, this is really just what are the things that are happening in the workspace. So if we think of managing projects, and then maybe for not all teams, maybe like minimal task management. From tasks, we're thinking through, okay, we definitely have due dates. We tend to look at priority level. We often reference other documents or links. And then every task needs an owner. So prioritizing, hey, whatever action we have, he needs to own that. As an example, right? So this is really just kind of brain dump process of what are the things that we're trying to do. This could include things like documents, workflows, knowledge management, and maybe like notes or ideas. This is also always going to change based on the team and based on the other tools that we're using as well. Usually, I think when it's the first week or so, or a couple weeks with a client, it's pretty common that they're like, when are we getting to the good stuff or the exciting stuff where we're looking at the nice Notion workspace? And we have to backtrack a little bit to say, this is really the core of the work, and then the building part and making it look neat essentially is really hinging on how detailed and how clear, how accurate this outline is. From there, we start with an outline, not only the types of information that we're tracking, like projects or tasks, but the metadata, so like properties within each database. This is likely to change as we get into building, but main thing we want to avoid here is adding a bunch of extra stuff because it's part of a template or because we've seen other Notion dashboards tracking that stuff. So just taking an essentialist approach to that. When we talk about mapping out the workspace structure, the key thing here is deciding where we want to relate different databases. So the most common relation by far is if we have projects, that's likely relating to tasks, because we could start to group tasks by project. We could maybe filter only tasks that are part of active projects. But the key, I think, exercise here is deciding where do we benefit from making a relation so that we could quickly connect one page in a database to another page in a different database. Apart from that, thinking through how do we want to organize our space hierarchically. If we just think through here, just as an aside, this dashboard, which is a combination of everything like personal, professional, client related, everything is in a toggle. I go to actions, for example. These are all active projects. I could open each specific project. But then if I'm on my phone and this kind of toggle thing does this call out section to jump straight into that page. And that way I could still get that functionality without having to, in a different way, just kind of optimizing for mobile versus on a big desktop. And this essentially starts with the same thing. We're bullet pointing out there's a lot of other databases in the workspace, but these that I'm using most often. And a quick note on buttons. So rather than having just a large collection of a database of notes, I'm syncing this block of running notes throughout like my daily planner and different areas of the workspace. And when I click on this button, it's automatically tagging today. And I could just drop in any notes. And then when I'm through all of those notes, I could drop that into this little archive toggle. And then maybe weekly or monthly, just delete all the stuff in the toggle as an example. So if we go back to the checklist, mapping out structure, starting simple, what things are we organizing in databases and how are those connected to each other? And then the third step is the minimum viable setup. So there's a lot of different ways we could organize our dashboards or our HQ page. That's definitely led to a lot of deliberation with clients on what's the best way to organize this stuff. And it jumps a few steps ahead a little bit because high priority or priority number one is making sure that team members can find what they need and do the work that they need to do as quickly and effectively as possible. And then exploring different layouts after that. So like a little bit lower priority, at least that's my take. So this third step is really about, is this easy to navigate apart from the whole sidebar conversation? Can we find what we need in the workspace and then in particular dashboards just to make sure that everybody's organized? When we get into optimizing and training, this is really just notes that have been helpful where if we're working with our team or with a client, using this to drop in notes as to what questions come up, where do people meet certain friction where they can't find what they're looking for or get confused. Any of that feedback, bringing that in as much as possible so that there's clarity around. That might mean we have more descriptions on pages or more guidelines for team members, things like that. And then when it gets to training and improving, the leanest way to approach this is just quick Loom video where it's a day in the life of a team member getting to a document or making edits and doesn't have to start at least very thorough or complex. Surprising, like just having a quick 4 or 5 minute, hey, this is how you do things. Here's how you use the / in context of the workspace. Usually goes a long way to help team members get a sense of how things are laid out. And then one last point on the checklist, Notion releases a ton of, my note takers going crazy on the comments. Notion releases a lot of features and they're releasing them very quickly. So it could be easy to get bogged down by making sure that we're accounting for all those new features and how do they affect the workspace, which is why it's typically worked the best that in some cases, like monthly reviews of the workspace, but more so quarterly, where that's an opportunity to make bigger changes to the workspace and really just avoiding the scenario where we're constantly making changes and then team members are getting confused as to, wait, this page was over here and now it's part of this other database and I'm not sure what happened there. So planning those optimizations like monthly or quarterly where we might be making some changes because we're implementing like the Notion Q&A feature, or we're adding descriptions to database properties, which is a new feature, things like that. And also just to make sure that we're not constantly like making changes in perpetuity. Yeah. And then this is the checklist I'm using. So we're working our way through when I'm working with clients, especially when it's like optimizing workspaces and prior to the actual build stuff. And before we go, got a couple really brief announcements. Something that if you're interested to learn more, you could scan this, or if you toggled on the RSVP, then you'll get automatic updates. But we are hosting our Workspace Builders Bootcamp starting in the second week of January. This is going to be 3 weeks, so an extra week versus our Notion Consultant Bootcamp, which we did in November, October. Can't remember anymore, early November, which was 2 weeks. And really, this actually came out of the Notion Consultant Bootcamp and really just having a space for specifically going end to end on what are the steps that we can take to build a workspace that is effective, that is high performance, and that is making work easier for teams. And going into a lot of the things that have just worked well in the past with previous projects and trying to get a handle on that. And similar to the Notion Consultant Bootcamp, having full access to the circle space, which has also been really cool to see everybody connecting and networking in the space. And then one difference from the last bootcamp is starting with a template that has a lot of the building blocks that we could start with. So even though we go through the process of starting with a clear, simple, bullet pointed outline, we do have these building blocks that we could use and save some time on the building process. That is really just leveraging, okay, we know that these are typically the best ways to organize things like projects, tasks, documents. And so that's going to be kicking off January 8th. I think enrollment is set to open in about a week and a half or so. So I'm going to be sending some more information on that. And like I mentioned, this is specifically for if you've been in the Notion space and have started creating templates and are exploring building workspaces for clients, or you've had people reach out to you for help without becoming a full-time, full-blown consultant. That could be a useful way to leverage your skills and expertise in addition to other work that you're doing. Or if you're at a team or part of a company that is using Notion and you're the in-house expert or in-house guru, there's likely to be a lot of practices that you can apply in your company's workspace as well. Again, that's going to be kicking off January 8th. If you're interested in that, if you check that box in the RSVP, you'll get updates. And then otherwise, you could scan that code and then drop in your email to sign up for updates and get a sense of when that launches. That's all I've got. Thanks so much for coming. Hope it was helpful. If you get that email with feedback, definitely drop in any feedback. Otherwise, have a great rest of your afternoons and evenings.